presentation tonight on the voter ID. She may throw some questions at you. Be ready.
This is about as big as it kind of gets right here.
Well, good evening. My name is Jessica Terrell, and I am in the Training and Outreach Department at the North Carolina State Board of Elections. So I'm happy to be here tonight in Alleghany County to talk to you all about voter photo ID. So I'm using a PowerPoint to get through my presentation here. So my PowerPoint's in 4 sections. The first section will be about the new voter photo ID requirements. The second section will be about provisional ballots. The third section will be about voter registration, and the final section will be about residency requirements. So before we start, I ask that you, if you haven't already, please silence your cell phones. And also to let you know that we are recording, and the recording will be placed on YouTube, so you can smile and wave. If there are any county board staff or members in the audience as we go through, if you start to have questions about policy or procedure, let's talk about that after the seminar. Let's get started. The first section will be about the new voter ID requirement. And the first thing you need to know is that voter ID is not required for any election in 2019. So are there municipals in Alleghany this year? Yes. So if you have, you go to a municipal election this year in Alleghany County, you will not be asked to show a photo ID this year. But starting with the 2020 primary election, all voters will be asked to show a photo ID when presenting to vote in person. And a voter who uses absentee by mail will be asked to submit a copy of an acceptable form of photo ID. Now, there are many acceptable forms of photo ID, and we'll go through these one at a time. You can use a North Carolina driver license or a non-operator ID. This card cannot be expired by more than 1 year. You can use a U.S. passport or a passport card. The passport cannot be expired by more than 1 year. You can use a U.S. military ID card or a veteran ID. Now, this card does not have an expiration limit on it. So, for example, my dad's a veteran of the United States Navy, and his ID doesn't have an expiration date on it because he's always a veteran. So that means a poll worker should not be looking for an expiration date on a card like this. You can use the tribal membership card of a federally recognized tribe. This is another card that does not need an expiration date. You can use the tribal membership card of a state-recognized tribe like Lumbee or Halawasaponi if they've applied to the state board and their card has been approved by us. This card also does not need to have an expiration date on it. Originally, the deadline for this card was March the 13th, but the legislature reopened that process, and the state board has to have a final approval list by November 1st. You can go to our website and see the tribes we've already approved so far. You can use an approved student ID card from a state or a private university or from a community college. An expiration date will be needed for cards like these, but not until 2021. So that means next year, if a student's card doesn't have an expiration date on it, that's okay. But starting in 2021, it will need to have one. This is the same process as the state tribe cards. They had to be approved by us, and so that new deadline is now November 1. You can use an approved employee ID card from a state or a local government agency, from a public or a charter school, or from a public university. Same with the student card that doesn't need an expiration date until 2021, and the application process has been reopened and will finalize November 1. Now, for voters coming from another state, from D.C., from a territory or a commonwealth, they can use their driver license or non-operator ID, but only if their registration was within 90 days of the election. And this card also cannot be expired by more than 1 year. If a voter is over 65, there's a special provision in the statute for them. A voter who's over 65 can use an expired form of any of those IDs, so long as that ID was not expired when that voter was at least 65. So, for example, my great-grandmother is 95 years old and probably hasn't driven in 20 years. But she still has her driver license from when she was driving. She doesn't need to get a new one. She doesn't need to try to go to the DMV and figure out something else. She can use that old card. So what if a person does not have any of those photo ID cards? That was a lot of options, and many people may have one or more than one of those. I have 3 of those. But there are some who won't have any. So what do we do for them? There is a new voter photo ID that is available statewide. The voter photo ID is provided free of charge, and getting one is a pretty easy process. In order to get a voter photo ID, you need to come here to your County Board of Elections office. And you'll provide on a form your name, your date of birth, and the last 4 digits of your Social Security number. So that will be compared to your voter registration that's on file. And then they'll take your picture and either print your card right away or they'll mail it to you in a few days. All counties have been capable of making photo ID cards as of May 1st. The voter photo ID is valid for 10 years from the day you came in and requested it. You must request it in person. When the card expires, it's not tied to your voter status, so you don't suddenly become an inactive voter. You're not suddenly taken off the poll book. It means it's time to take a new picture because 10 years later, you may look a little different. So when can you get one created? Anytime that the county board office is open, except for a very small window. That's the window between the last day of early voting and election day. So that's only going to be a few days where you would not be able to get one made. Otherwise, you can get one made whenever your county board office is open, so you can get one made tomorrow. A lost or defaced card will be replaced free of charge, and a voter who has a name change would also be able to get a replacement free of charge. There is no time where a voter would be charged for this ID. So now you'll have to show an ID when you go to the polls. What does that look for you on election day, either at one stop or on election day? Well, the voter will come to the voting site. You'll wait your turn. And the precinct official will ask you to state your name and your current address. As you're stating that information, you are simultaneously showing your photo ID. So that's happening all at the same time. If you're using an ID that has an address, like your driver's license, that address will not be compared to what's in the poll book. That poll worker is only looking to check your identification. After looking at everything and making sure it all lines up, the voter receives a ballot. We want to highlight curbside voting. As we've gone across the state, we realize that it's being underutilized in some areas. So curbside voting is at every precinct during one stop and on election day. It's for voters who can get themselves to the precinct, but for some reason cannot navigate the inside of the building. So if you're using curbside, an election official comes out to your vehicle and asks for your name and your address, and also will ask for an affirmation oath, which essentially says, I am eligible to use curbside voting. And you would show that precinct official a form of photo ID starting in 2020. For absentee by mail, a voter will now need to attach an acceptable form of ID. Now, if a voter's not able to do that, the voter will need to sign an affidavit, essentially saying, I'm unable to do that. And you'd have to choose from a list of reasons why you're not able to do that. For absentee by mail, one of the options will be, I don't have access to a method to make a copy. I don't have access to a copier or some kind of way to photocopy that and attach it. Military and overseas citizen voting is not impacted by voter photo ID, and we'll explain that more in another slide. So the big question is, can a person vote without a form of photo ID? Well, all voters will be allowed to vote with or without an acceptable form of photo ID. Now, starting in 2020, you will be asked to show a form of photo ID. And if you know you don't have one, your best option is to come here to your county board office and have one made for free. If a voter comes to vote without an acceptable form of photo ID, that voter will vote provisionally. There are 2 ways that that vote can be counted. If that voter has an acceptable form of photo ID, but they don't have it with them, it's in their other bag, it's not in my wallet, I don't know what happened, but I have one, that voter will vote provisionally and will have 10 business days, the canvas window, to come down to the county board office and show it. And at that time, that ballot will count. The second option is for that voter to choose what's called a reasonable impediment, essentially saying there's a reason why I don't have an ID today. And we'll talk more about that in provisional ballots. This is a great place to stop and ask if there are any questions. Are there any so far? Yes.
If you can't verify by ID that person is that person, do you vote provisional?
So there are reasonable resemblance rules that are currently still in draft status at the state board. So that has not been decided as far as what to do if a poll worker believes that that person doesn't resemble the ID that they're showing. But there will be a process for that, and it's currently in public comment status right now. Other questions? Okay, let's move on to provisional ballot. So there are many reasons why a voter may be asked to vote provisionally. It could be there's a question about if that voter is qualified to vote, a question about if that voter is eligible for that particular election, a question about if a voter is eligible for that ballot style, and now if there's a question about the voter's photo ID. So as I mentioned a moment ago, if a voter does not present an acceptable form of photo ID, that voter will be offered a provisional ballot. The two ways it can be counted is either that voter states they have one and will bring it in within that 10-day canvass window, or that voter needs to choose a reasonable impediment that they qualify for. So I've mentioned that a couple of times. Let's explain reasonable impediment. The first one is an inability to obtain a photo ID for a particular reason, such as lack of transportation, disability or illness, a lack of a birth certificate or some other underlying document you'd need to obtain a photo ID, your work schedule, or family responsibilities. So this would be a checklist of sorts, and the voter would need to choose the one that applies to them. There are a few other reasonable impediments, like a lost or a stolen photo ID. Your photo ID's been applied for but not yet received. So like when you go to the DMV now, you don't get the card anymore, you get like a piece of paper, right? That paper is unacceptable at the poll. The voter needs to have the physical card. If the voter showed up with the paper and not the card, this is the impediment that would apply to them. Or some other reason that we couldn't come up with that the voter will need to describe on the affidavit. There are two other exceptions to presenting a photo ID. One is a religious objection to being photographed. And another is natural disaster, but that's very specific criteria. The natural disaster needs to have occurred 100 days before the election, and your area needs to be declared a disaster by the president or the governor. So that if New Hanover County, for example, had a hurricane, then Alleghany County is probably not going to claim natural disaster based on that hurricane. No one will be turned away from the polls because they didn't have a form of photo ID, and the provisional ballot system gives every voter the opportunity to cast their vote on election day and have it cleared up during canvass. Are there any questions about provisional ballots?
You mentioned the driver's license, if you had the paper, you know, the paper's got your picture on it.
Right, but as far as the statute's concerned, it needs to be the physical card.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
What religion's objective voter?
I don't have the answer to that. The way the statute is worded is that a religious objection to being photographed is an acceptable reason for a reasonable impediment. You're not to question that at the poll? No. You would allow them to vote provisionally, and they would choose that as their impediment, and they're signing it. It's essentially an affidavit.
So they'll be voting provisional.
That's right. Other questions? Okay, let's move into voter registration. And this may be reviewed, but that's okay. It doesn't hurt to review every now and then. How can a person register to vote? Well, in North Carolina, to register to vote, you have to meet the qualifications and you have to complete a voter registration application. The qualifications to vote in North Carolina are the following. You must be a citizen of the United States. You must have lived in the county you're registering in at least 30 days ahead of the election. You must be at least 18 years old. And you must not be serving a sentence for a felony conviction, and this includes probation or parole. So when a person's been convicted of a felony, they've lost their citizenship rights while they are serving that sentence. But once they complete serving the sentence, including probation or parole, their rights are restored. And at that time, they can register again. It's not an automatic process. If they were registered before, it doesn't automatically restore. But they can apply again. Now, a 17-year-old can register to vote and vote in a primary if the 17-year-old will be 18 in time for the general election. And a future voter can pre-register to vote up to 2 years ahead of their 18th birthday, and the most common time that happens is at the DMV getting that very first driver license. Where can a person register to vote? Well, we'll first want to point you to our handy-dandy website, ncsb.gov. We have the voter registration forms available. But one thing we want to make clear as we travel the state is that there's no way to register to vote online in North Carolina. You must fill out the application, you must sign it, and you must submit it to your county office. So if you can't print one off online, there's a few places you can go to get one in person. You can come see us in downtown Raleigh at the State Board of Elections. We'll greet you with a smile and put one in your hand. You can come here to your county board office and get voter registration applications, and we have some here if anybody would like to take some home. You can go to a public library. You can go to a public high school or university. Or in your area, you may see voter registration drives. Those are all places where you can get one in person or in hand if you're unable to print one out off of the internet. There are also certain agencies that service people who need help with voter registration, and the most common time that's done is at the DMV. You may have changed your address with the DMV on your driver license, and they may ask you, do you want to update your voter registration? And you say yes. And magically a card comes in the mail that you need to sign and you need to send back. The DMV just serviced you as a client with voter registration. Other agencies that do that are social services, public health, disability services like deaf and hard of hearing, and employment security. All of those agencies can assist with voter registration. Now, we want to point out that the registration deadline is 25 days before each election. That is when your county office needs to receive that paper application. Now, one common error people make is they go to our website, it is handy and dandy, and they print one out, and they mail it to us in Raleigh, and then we open it, and we say, oh, Sparta, Alleghany County, okay, and we fold it back up and put it in a new envelope, and we address it down here, and it gets mailed to your county office. And when that happens, you've lost a couple of days, right? It got mailed to us, and then had to get mailed back here. You may have lost a week. And so that's often how people miss the registration deadline. So if a person misses the registration deadline, can they still vote in the upcoming election? I'm seeing mostly head nodding. Okay, that's good, they can. At same-day registration, right? It's early voting, absentee one-stop, same day. It has a lot of nice little terms there. And the person can register during that period. That is a 17-day window, where if you've messed up your address and need to update it, that's also a great place to fix that before you get to election day. So in order to do that, you'll need to bring something with you to prove your residence on the spot. There's not going to be time for that little postcard system. You have to prove it right then. So what I'm going to show you now is things that you can bring if you need to register same day. Your North Carolina driver license or some other government agency issued photo ID with your current name and current address. Now for this process, the address needs to be correct because they're registering you for the first time and placing you in a precinct for future elections. You can use a utility bill or a bank statement or a government document like a check with your name and current address. A college student can use a student ID and proof of campus habitation. Now, if you need to update anything with your voter registration, the way to do that is the form. You cannot do that online. You must resubmit the form. That's to change your name, to change your address, or to change your party affiliation. You have to use the form. So for military and overseas citizens, there are special programs to help them vote while they're away from home. They have two choices. The first choice is to use the absentee ballot request system that anyone in North Carolina can use. But the second option is the one we want to highlight. It's a federal program that makes it very easy for them. It gives them more time and more methods to submit, and it really is the best way for them to get the vote in time. So for more information about that, you can go to fvap.gov. And if a voter uses the federal program, they will not be subjected to voter photo ID requirements. That is a federal program. Are there any questions before we move into residency? Okay, we're in the home stretch. The address that you use when you register to vote is your permanent residential address. Now, the statute defines that as the place where you live, the place to which you return when you are absent. That sounds nice and fluffy and broad with a lot of wiggle room, but we'll talk about why it sounds like that in a few slides. If you temporarily relocate, yes, you absolutely can still vote, and the most common way people do that is absentee by mail. But if you change your permanent address, no, you cannot vote based on your previous address. You need to update your voter registration. And really, again, the early stop period is the easiest way to do it. If you get past that registration deadline and you realize you haven't done it, you vote somewhere else in the county and change it right then. So for folks who are homeless, we want to point out what the statute talks about here. If there's a person whose residence is not associated with what's called real property, an address, then that person can use the location of their usual sleeping place to determine their residency and place them in a precinct. And that's why that definition of residence is so broad. And most people overlook it, but on the voter registration application, there is a space that says if you don't have a physical address, here's a map. Draw where you usually sleep. And the county uses that to place you in a precinct. Another common question we get is about college students. There are people who come from all over to come to North Carolina to go to school, and then, of course, we have our own students who are moving around. And there's always questions about where someone who's attending college in North Carolina is supposed to vote. So let's clear that up. A college student in North Carolina has two choices. The first option is to decide that the college campus community is home, and that's where they want to vote. Now, they don't have to decide they're going to stay there after graduation to decide that it's home for those 4 years. They can still choose to register and vote there. The second option is to decide that where they came from is home, and they've essentially temporarily relocated. That college student would need to either return home and vote in person or use absentee by mail. Now, a common call we get at the state board is, well, I took my son down to vote and he wasn't on the poll book and I don't know what's going on. Well, let me tell you what your son probably did. There was this really awesome event on campus that said free pizza, and they walked in for free pizza. It was a voter registration drive, and your child filled out that application, took 2 slices of pizza and went on his way and didn't realize what he'd done. He just registered in that county, which will cancel his registration at home. And then you went to vote with your son, and surprise, surprise, he's not there. Because now he's registered in Watauga County because he goes to App. Well, now he's not in Alleghany County. That happens very often. So we want to be sure people understand that if a college student chooses that college campus community, it will cancel their registration at home. Now we have to tell you, please vote in only one place. One place, one place. If you do not do that, you vote in more than one place or double vote, that is a Class I felony that is subjected to 3 to 12 months of some sort of punishment. Please don't do that. So this was a lot of information that we just covered tonight. And a common question we get is, how are we notifying the public of all of this? So we're doing many things, and we just want to kind of highlight some of the things we're doing. Twice in 2019 and twice in 2020, there will be mailers going out to every residential address in the state of North Carolina outlining the acceptable forms of photo ID. We're using media outlets, and if you have municipals this year and you attend and you vote in person, you'll see flyers about voter ID at the polls, like the one you picked up off the table today. Precinct official training is being written, the official training is being written, and so that's another way we'll get the word out. And I understand a lot of you here are poll workers, so I'm glad to see you here tonight. There are 2 voter information seminars in every county between May 1 and September 1. So you may call our office, but we may not be there. Because I'm here tonight, for example, there are 5 of us that travel the state doing these, and this is Allegany's first one. When's the second one, Sherry? August the 20th. Okay, so this is Allegany's first one. Local organizations, if you have a church group, a service club, or anything like that, and you would like for the state to come out and present to your group, we're happy to do that. You can see me after the seminar, and I'll give you my business card so that we can set something up when I'm back in the office. We're posting information in a lot of different places, and this entire presentation is on our website as a PDF. Finally, any voter who's registered but is not a client of the DMV, so they don't have a driver license or they don't have a non-operator ID, will get a special mailer just for them saying, we see you're registered, but you don't have one of the more common forms of acceptable ID. Here are the other acceptable IDs. And if you don't have any of those, you should go to your county board office and get one made for free. This is usually the part where I say your county would love to have you, but I think your county already has most of you, don't they? One thing we highlight, though, is the MAT teams. So, Sherry, can you talk about what the MAT team does?
My team goes out to facilities such as Genesis Healthcare here in Alleghany and assist voters who are not able to come to the either one stop or election day. They come to the office here and we certify them to go out and assist those voters in such facilities.
Other than poll workers in general, MAT teams are very understaffed across the state. So we were highlighting that process, and if you're interested, you could talk to Sherry more about that. And as I conclude, I just want to highlight a few things on our website. This is our homepage, ncsbe.gov. We have a page for voter ID. You'll see all the voter ID seminars that we have. I think now it's all the seminars that are left for the state. We have probably about 90 left to conduct. So we're still on the move. The application for the free ID is available as a PDF on our website, but you do have to do it in person. You'll have to bring it in. And also the rules, like reasonable resemblance, that may still be in draft form, are available here, as well as the statute in full is available here. Finally, we want to highlight our election security page. We do many things at the state board to keep the vote safe and secure, and we audit ourselves regularly, and we post the results here. If you have any questions about what we do to keep the vote safe in North Carolina, you can visit our website and click on the Election Security tab. That's all I have for you tonight, but I'm happy to take any final questions that you may have. Don't be shy. Well, I'm glad you came. Thank you so much for coming out. I'll be lingering afterward if anyone needs to speak with me or with Sherry. I appreciate your time and have a good evening.